Good day, students. This is the first study unit which you need to prepare before you attend class. This study unit focuses on the introduction to motor development. The following two slides just show you an indication of all the main aspects that will be discussed in this presentation. So you are welcome to pause and view all the main aspects. But it ranges from man in the world existence up to movement skills. It further includes language skills up until the ABCs of physical literacy.
As an introduction, you should know that the existence of humans are due to humans being physically, spiritually, and psychological beings. These three aspects, the physical, spiritual, and psychological, can be distinguished and can be explained separately, but they cannot be separated, which is important to know. So every one of these domains are very important for the human's existence. We are specifically focusing on the physical. Physical, if we talk about the physical, we can look at the early childhood development, which is a period where a lot of growth and learning takes place. So if we talk about growth and learning aspects such as motor control and coordination, motor control and coordination is important for general development and during the first few years of life, especially for gross motor development. So remember, gross motor development is movements such as balance, coordination, spatial orientation, everything that you need to be able to play a sport or to develop during academic growth. Early childhood development, the early childhood development period is also considered the period where significant brain growth takes place.
As a human movement specialist, you need to be able to understand the aspect of a human being a physical, spiritual, and psychological being. And due to the fact that you as a human movement specialist will focus on movement, that you are a movement expert. And as this expert or specialist of movement, you must be able to assist an individual, whether it will be a child or adult, in their psychomotor abilities by providing them with the knowledge in order to optimize all these aspects of their existence. We will elaborate more on this as we continue with the study units. As a human movement specialist, you already now know that the physical component is very important of the human body. This assists with motor development. So part of understanding these aspects is to look at regular physical activity, because regular physical activity will contribute to the well-being and in particular any health issues such as coronary heart diseases that can occur in a person. But physical activity is also very important for development overall of the child. Now, physical activity is your everyday tasks or activities that you do that will increase your heart rate and is on a certain level of intensity. We as human movement specialists should know that the prescribed exercise of being moderately physical active per day is 60 minutes.
The problem is that a large amount of the population in the world does not engage enough in physical activity and therefore do not have the health benefits which will have a negative influence on the overall life ability of the person. An inactive child is an inactive adult. So some of the reasons why children is not physically active are due to the push-button friendly society. Children spend hours in front of the TV, or they like to play games on their phones, on their tablets or iPads. and screen time takes control of the time that a child should actually be playing and be active outside. Children therefore become spectators rather than participants. Then another reason is physical education. Physical education is not presented effectively in a lot of school environments, and the teachers do not want to go outside with the children. So that means the result at the end of the day is that the children stay indoors and they are not physically active or motivated to be physically active.
The result of inactivity causes a worldwide concern for overweight and obesity in children. When you look specifically at this slide, you will see that 1 out of every 5 children in South Africa is overweight or obese, and 14.2% of these children are in primary schools. This has a detrimental effect on the child's development, his focus in class during academic activities, as well as overall physical activity, social skills, making friends, mental health, and so forth.
When we see the concern being raised regarding inactivity and overweight and obesity, as well as development constraints and learning problems due to the physical body that is not moving, we can understand that we as movement specialists play a very important role in these children's lives. So movement specialists can actually optimize development, early learning, and education. Researchers have also acknowledged that motor activities should be part of the school curriculum, and therefore this creates new opportunities in our profession as movement specialists, because now we can create that motor programs for, or motor activities for the curriculum. So what I want to show you with this slide is that a child's brain develops as the child experiences or receives stimulation. Here you can clearly see at birth there is not as many connections as the child of 24 months will have due to experience. Basically what happens is during the early childhood development, the brain has critical stages where neural development is more sensitive for stimulation. We call this the windows of opportunity. For example, the window in the brain opens for vision development from birth and it will close at 2 years. So that's from 0 to 2 years. This is important to know because it is important that the correct stimulation takes place during that time frame. If the brain is not provided with experience in the environment or not provided the opportunity, the neural composition will not develop to its full potential. Remember, the brain grows as we use it, like muscles. So the more you train, the bigger your muscles will get. Also, for example, like reading. When a child reads a lot, the brain remembers how to read and your speed improves and your memory improves. This is an image of the indication of the windows of opportunity for motor development. You can see that basic gross motor skills have the window of opportunity from prenatal to 5 years. Postural control, which means control your posture while sitting, standing and bending over, and so forth, and general movement skills have their window of opportunity for the first 2 years, from 0 to 2. You can also see that the image shows the fine motor development that occur from 0 to 9 years. The period between 3.5 and 7 years are important for perceptual motor development, And also what you cannot see on the picture is the window of opportunity for visual perceptual mechanisms, which is the period between 5 to 7 years. So these sensitive periods will improve the development more when compared to similar stimulation that is provided at a later stage. So 50% of children's learning potential is already established at the age of 5. This is very important for you to know as a movement specialist to compile age-appropriate and child-centered movement development programs for preschool children. So you are going to consider all the ages and the window of opportunity of specific skills to develop your programs. Another aspect to consider regarding movement is that movement contributes to school readiness. A child requires all of the skills listed in this slide: the reading, the listening, the writing, the readiness, the language, and the self-concept, to be able to go to grade 1. Readiness skills include visual, auditive, and tactile skills. So your visual you will use to, for example, read or look at information on the board and various educational activities during class time. Auditive is, for example, to learn the various sounds to form a word, and tactile is to feel your book and the position where you are in class. What is important is if you develop these readiness skills through gross motor development programs, you are actually also improving their visual, auditive, and tactile skills through movement, like moving through an obstacle course, touching various tactile different shapes and objects, and listening to different and various rhythms will also help with readiness skills. Listening skills include being able to hear a sound of a letter and to repeat what you have heard. This is very important for spelling and being able to write and read. Also to make associations with the environment and the people you are involved with. You can also develop the listening skills through motor development programs during play activities outside. This is where you will, for example, include colors, rhythms, and change of direction by making use, for example, making use of a whistle or providing specific instructions. Reading skills is the ability to read from left to right, from top to bottom, and to be able to cross the middle line with your eyes. Your eyes move from left to right when you are reading. It does not stop in the middle of the page and go back to the left side. So think of when you are looking at a page in front of you and you are reading. You are focusing and reading from left to right. Your eyes is not jumping when it enters the center of the page. You are able to cross your midline. So reading also includes being able to see shapes, sizes, and so forth. You can also develop reading skills through gross motor development, being able to play outside, making use of an obstacle course where a child needs to change a lot of direction, make use of different shapes, moving under, over, and around things. Writing skills include being able to hold a pencil correct using finger and hand muscles. It further includes having control action of when to start and to stop, and it involves your posture control by sitting up correctly and controlling your position of your head in an upright position. All of these abilities can be developed through gross motor activities and programs. You need a lot of muscle strength, not only just in your fingers and your hand, but also in your core, as well as your shoulder strength. If you develop a good core strength, you will have a good posture, and that is something that children struggle a lot with these days, which is very important for them to progress in their academic career career and also being able to write effectively and keep up with the pace of the academics. Language skills include body awareness, spatial orientations, opposites and action words like up, down, low and high. These are all activities that's firstly developed through gross motor development programs during the early childhood. Self-image improves through movement by increasing self-confidence. The more a child accomplishes during movement, the better they feel about themselves and the better they will strive to do their best in the academic world.
The next part is just a brief overview of the theories of motor development. So there are theories and concepts that is important for motor development. This will be discussed later in another study unit. The first theory is the dynamic system framework and theory. This is three aspects that will have an influence on how you will execute a movement or a task. So these three aspects will have an influence. The first one is environmental, so that is any changes in the physical surrounding that will have an influence on how a task is executed. In the individual, that is the person itself that is participating in the activity or the movement. So that will usually be structural or functional movement aspects. And then the task is any rules or goals or equipment that might have an influence on the movement or activity. This will be discussed more in detail in another study unit and provide you with practical examples that you should be able to apply. Next model is the constraint model. This specifically focuses on physical activity behaviors, which will have an influence on how healthy or unhealthy you are, and also how you perceive yourself as competent and motor competent to execute specific activities and being healthy and fit. The ecological system theory is a theory that focuses on how the social environment have an influence on human development. So you will see it is divided into the micro, meso, exo, macro and chrono system, and this will also be discussed in depth with examples in another study unit.
The last part is being able to understand what is physical literacy. So physical literacy refers to the motivation and the self-confidence, the physical competence, the knowledge and understanding of the importance of physical activity. So that also includes the responsibility for the lifelong participation in physical activities. So each child needs to have the motivation, they need to have the self-confidence, and they need to have the physical competence and understand the importance of physical activity to be able to be physically active for the rest of their lives. So the sense of one's own physical abilities combined with motor proficiency during interaction with one's environment is a fundamental concept of physical literacy. So being able to understand movement proficiency is very important because that is actually helping to determine your physical literacy of a child as they are getting older. The individual's ability to evaluate the demands of a task and then to adjust his motor skills according to the new circumstances is very important and actually an expected outcome of an individual, so the child, who have good physical literacy. There is various models that will explain physical literacy. You will see in the next two slides more models that will provide you with information on physical literacy. This Apple model shows you that all of these aspects interlink with each other to be physical literate. We can see, for example, the environment. Is there enough opportunities and exposure for you to be physically active? Or play activities? Is there time for practice? Is it joyful? And that will also then motivate you to move. Are you confident to move? Are you competent to move? And then also, is there engagement and relationships? Are you encouraged? Are you challenged? All of these aspects plays a very important role in being able to be physically literate. Here is another example that you can go and look at that explains to you. It's actually an infographic of the factors and interlinking with each other to be physically literate. Here is the ABCs of being physical literate. So if you have good agility, being able to run, to dodge, to jump, and to dribble. If you have good balance, being able to try to crawl, then hop, skate, and stretch. And if you have good coordination, to be able to try and throw a ball, to catch, to kick, and run. All of these aspects is basic movement skills that you need to be able to do so that you can participate in physical activity. Hello students, welcome to study unit 2 of HNSC 112. The focus will be on the phases of motor development. For study unit 2, there are 3 learning outcomes that you need to achieve. The first one is to identify the phases of motor development, then to describe them, and also to distinguish between phases. This will be illustrated through videos and also providing you with a triangle illustration of the phases. You are probably first of all wondering, why do you need to understand the phases of motor development? So while you are studying human movement sciences, you will become a human movement specialist. In order for you to be a human movement specialist, you need to have the knowledge and the ability to classify children in the different phases of motor development. And the reason why you need to know this is that this will provide you with the understanding and the guidelines to compile specific developmental programs for these children in order for them to develop their specific sports skills, to be able to play in various sports, as well as to conduct all over daily activities. So when we look at the phases and stages of motor development, it will be illustrated in the form of this triangle. The triangle represents different phases, age periods, and specific stages or phases of motor development. The center part of the triangle illustrates the general phases of motor development, whereas the left part will represent our age periods of development, and then the right part will be the specific phases and stages of motor development. So when we're specifically looking in the center at the general triangle with the general phases, they have 4 components or 4 specific focus phases. The first one is the reflexive phase, then it's the rudimentary or the first movement phase, then it will be the fundamental phase and the sport-specific or sport-focused skill phase. When you look at this triangle, you will see that each phase consists of various ages. So the reflexive movement phase will start before birth, and then the sport-specific focus skills will end at 14 years and older. And then for each age category within the general phases,
it is also divided into specific stages within each of these phases. So for example, if we look at the fundamental movement phase, for children from 2 to 3 years, they will fall in the initial stage of the fundamental movement phase. For children 4 to 5 years, they will fall in the elementary stage, and then 6 to 7 years in the adult stage. It is very important to understand and know all of the specific phases as well as the ages that they consist of within each phase, and then the stages correspond to the different phases and ages. Each phase and stage will be explained in depth within the second part of the presentation. The second part of the phases of motor development will focus specifically on the reflexive movement phase. Phases and stages of motor development, it has the triangle with our 4 elements as previously discussed, and now we are focusing on this specific phase. So when you look at this phase, the reflexive movement phase, it is divided in 2 stages, the information decoding and the information encoding phase. The information encoding phase occurs from before birth to 4 months, and then the information decoding phase occurs from 4 months to 1 year. With the reflexive movement phase, as you already know, it starts in the prenatal phase. So the prenatal phase is where we talk about before birth, while the mother is still pregnant with the baby, and then this will occur until after birth. When the baby is born with the natural need and drive to move, and also with all the senses ready to function. So when we specifically talk about the senses, we look at things like taste, sight, hearing, smell, and touch. Then during these movements are initiated by reflexes. The reflexes is very important because that enables the baby to move. This movement and development occurs in an orderly and structured manner and is actually driven by primitive reflexes. Primitive reflexes are very important because later in life that will form the basis for all learning. Just a quick overview on what is meant by a primitive reflex. So the baby is born with a number of reflexes. Now these reflexes, there's 4 examples in this picture. So for example, the rooting reflex is if you take your finger and you put it next to the child's or the baby's cheek, the baby will automatically turn his or her head. This is a reflex. Then the sucking reflex, if a bottle is taken towards a baby's mouth, the automatic thing that will happen is the baby will open his or her mouth and suck on the bottle to get the milk out. This is all part of primitive reflexes. It happens naturally. Another thing that I would like to highlight is you will see with the reflexive movement phase, it stretches from before birth to 1 year, and this actually will then incorporate the first movement phase or rudimentary movement phase because it will occur at the same time. As you will see, the reflex inhibition phase is from birth to 1 year. So this will occur simultaneously. What is further very important to know about the reflexive movement phase is this is the period where the infant will develop their neck, head and trunk stability or control, which will help them to roll over, to sit, to crawl, and to eventually stand up. As I've said, this happens in an orderly manner. So first the rollover will occur and then later only the standing up. These are part of the baby milestones that need to be achieved by all babies. Baby requires exercise because exercise actually helps the baby to learn how to control all of the various movements. So for example, to have a controlled walking, sitting, rolling and other grasping skills that is required for them to learn about the environment. Now that you know that exercise is important for the development of all of these controlled movements, it is also important to take note that it helps developing of the central nervous system. Now, what you need to know is that when you provide activities to babies, you need to focus on progression and progressive activities, because the activities that you provide to the baby will depend on their development level. You will not specifically look at the baby's age when you do specific activities with them, because each individual will have differences in development during this stage. So what you need to do and what is important is playing with the baby. When you play with the baby, you can become aware of which development level they are in, and this will help and assist you to choose the appropriate activities for that development level. It will also help you to understand a baby's behavior. The third part of the study unit will focus on the rudimentary or first movement phase. When we look at the triangle again, we are focusing now on this part of the phases, which is the rudimentary phase, also known as the first movement phase. Then you will also see that this phase is divided into two age groups, which ranges from the birth of the baby to 1 year, and that is the reflex inhibition stage, and then 1 to 2 years, which focuses on the pre-control phase. When specifically looking at this phase, we know it's from baby to 2 years old, from the birth of the baby, and we focus on the development of specific skills: locomotor, then manipulation, and stability skills. When we're specifically looking at locomotor skills refers to movement, meaning moving from one point to another. Examples of these types of movements is crawling, walking, running, and so forth. Then, if we look at manipulation is usually activities that includes reaching and grasping, so that is when you are manipulating an object. Later on, that will be, for example, writing or throwing and kicking. Then with your stability skills has got everything to do with your balance, and there you will have to have control over your head, neck, and trunk, and that stability provides me with the opportunity to sit still and not fall over. Or let's say, for example, I've let a pen fall down on the floor. If I bend over to pick it up, I still keep my balance and I don't fall over. So during this first movement phase, these three types of skills are very important for development. When we also look at the first movement phase, we can observe that infants will have hardly any control over their fine motor skills. So remember, fine motor skills is anything where I use my fingers to do fine motor activities, such as for holding a pencil, holding a spoon, putting pegs into a pegboard, cutting out, and so forth. So although they don't have very control over these fine motor skills, they already have a lot of the components that requires them to eventually do this finely coordinated arm, hand, and finger movements. The infants will specifically show refined or rudimentary shoulder and elbow movement in the beginning, and then later they will have more wrist movements. They will then eventually show hand rotations and then have more coordination of the thumb and the index forefinger. The maturation, meaning the progression and maturity of hand-eye coordination movements, will be indicated through seeing how their fine motor skills improve. The more they do the skill and activity, the better it will become and execute it. The last very important aspect to know about the phases of motor development, and the two that we've already completed, is when you look at the the lowest part is the reflexive phase. That reflexive phase, as well as the second phase, the first movement phase, needs to be very well established in order for them to move to the next development phase, which is the fundamental movement phase. So the reflexive and the first movement phase is very important building blocks in order to be able to execute fundamental skills and specialized movement skills later in the age that they are growing into. Part 4 of the study unit focuses on the fundamental movement phase. Now, when we look at the triangle, specifically the fundamental movement phase is the third phase, which we will focus on. It is divided into 3 age groups, ranging from 2 years up until 7 years. Initial stage falls between 2 to 3 years, elementary stage 4 to 5 years, and the adult stage or mature stage 4 to 7 years. As you already know, the period for the fundamental movement phase ranges from 2 years to 7 years, and this is a very, very important time for the development of motor skills. This is during the early childhood years of the development, and basically during this time, your basic posture, locomotor, manipulation skills, and so forth will develop during the first 2 years. Remember, your basic skills and your posture and your locomotor skills is anything that's got to do with your movement and the control of your body, neck, and your trunk, as well as being able to kick a ball, grasping a pencil, and picking up equipment. The fundamental movement phase consists of 3 stages, and that is what I will discuss next. When we're specifically looking at the fundamental movement phase, we are going to do more in-depth focuses on the stages that falls under this phase. The first one is the initial phase, which ranges from 2 to 3 years, and this is usually characterized by uncoordinated and crude type of movements. Then we focus on the elementary stage, where the children are between 4 to 5 years old, and the movements will be more coordinated and there will be more rhythmical performance increases, better control, but there will still be a lack in the fluidity of the movements. Then when we look at the mature phase, that is your age between 6 to 7 years, and this is usually where the skills are more coordinated, or we will say well coordinated, mechanically correct, and efficient act of flow. I want you to specifically look at the various stages we just spoke about. Now, basically what happens is your fundamental skills have developed, and now it is in the initial stage from 2 to 3 years. When maturation takes place, which plays obviously a very important role in the refinement of these fundamental movement skills, then it will move to the elementary stage and then eventually to the mature stage or adult stage. So as soon as these fundamental movement skills, remember now our fundamental movement skills is our stability, locomotor, and manipulation skills. If this matures and it reaches the mature stage of the fundamental movement phase, it can develop into sport-specific skill, meaning it will move to the next phase. So as development into a mature skill forms, and it will be an essential foundation to develop sport skills. So if the movement skills has not gone through these stages and did not reach the mature stage, we cannot move to the sport-specific skills, and then the children will struggle. So even if the child is not in these age categories, but you evaluate the child and you see that the child still falls in the elementary stage, it means that you first need to get that child to develop up until the mature stage before they go and transition to the sport-specific skills. last part is part 5 and focuses on the sport-related movement phase. When we look at the triangle, that will be the last phase, which is sport-focused skills. And when we're specifically looking at this phase, we are looking at the transitional phase, ranging from 7 to 10 years, specific phase 11 to 13 years, and specialized phase 14 years and older.
Okay, the last one is sport-related movement phase. So this is the phase where a child will reach the ability and skill to be able to play different sports. The only way that the child can reach this phase is when he or she successfully moved through all the other movement development phases as I have explained.
This slide is just an indication of the different stages of the triangle, consisting of the sport-related movement phase with the relevant ages.
The first stage is the general transitional stage. That is children between 7 to 10 years, which is also known as the mid-childhood years. And the phase is characterized by the expansion and the refining of the fundamental skills. So remember now, the fundamental skills is the manipulation skills, locomotor skills, and the stability skills that has been refined and has reached the mature stage in the fundamental movement phase, and now it can be further expanded and refined during the general transitional stage. So children will become more interested in sport and standards of performance. So they will start to evaluate on how they are performing and would want to be the best or improve. They will also begin to compete with their peers, and children are interested in a variety of sports. It's not necessary that they only want to play rugby or soccer. They do not really feel that they need to play a specific sport, and therefore they have that interest for variety of sports. So the skillful execution of the skills is still limited at this stage of the child's life, because the child is only now getting an idea of the execution of the movement. So when you present a program, you need to start to pay careful attention to accuracy and the improvement of the skill during the execution. This phase is actually very important to make sure that you teach the skill in the correct manner, and that you also not motivate a child if they are doing the movement incorrectly, but actually working on helping them to correct the movement and then exercise and practice the correct movement. The development of the fundamental skill is now of such a nature that it can be utilized in related sport-specific games. So, for example, where the child learns to strike, or the striking skill to strike a ball, and then it is refined to where it can be related to specific sport, like for example, being able to strike a golf ball or softball, or using a tennis racket or hockey stick. You can use that during your program development. Then the teacher's main aim should be to help the learner to improve according to his or her development needs and potential. The overall aim of improvement is to be able to control the movement. The child also needs to learn emotional control, which includes the self-discipline, responsibility, and self-control, and enjoyment, which is very important. So this specific movement phase or stage during the sport-related movement phase, is where the child will become more aware of their physiological and personality shortcomings, so also their strengths and their weaknesses. They will begin to focus on certain sport types, and skills and style will improve in this phase.
but that will only happen if they exercise and practice a lot. So during this phase, the focus is more for them also on improving their skills they want to improve. More complex skills are refined in order to be used in official sports or specific sports. Okay, then we go to the next stage of the sport-related phase. Specialization phase is the last phase in sport-related phase. This phase will commence at about 14 years of age, usually when the child goes to high school, and it will continue thereafter. So the child can now apply the skills and techniques mastered during the earlier phases to recreational activities. They can use it in sport-related activities, they can use it in elite programs, or in daily activities. So this phase is the period when the individual will specialize in some sport according to his own talent and ability, according to his interests, the availability of coaches and facilities, previous experience, and their ambition. Further refinement of techniques takes place during this phase. The development of specialized skills are highly dependent on the experience, motivation, and quality instructions that you as the coach needs to provide. You will also then see in your textbook on page 33 and 34, there's a table 1.6, which provide general tips for coaches of children between 6 and 11 years, being able to understand their skills and what strategy tactics to use, games, level of competition, and other activities, as well as table 1.7 with general tips for coaches of children between 11 to 15 years. The next part we are talking about is the fundamental movement skills programs that you need to be able to develop as a movement specialist. First of all, before you start with developing a movement development program, you first need to understand the goals that should be prioritized when conducting movement development programs for children when they are in the fundamental movement phase. So first of all, the development of the perceptual motor processes occur mostly between the ages of 3.5 and 7 years of the child. Aspects that influence this development positively must therefore be included in a motor development program. So one of the goals is to include perceptual motor processes in your motor development program of 3.5 to 7 year children, and then the development of the full use of all the senses are essential. So remember, what is our senses? It's our visual system, tactile, our taste, our hear, feel, even the muscle movements, proprioceptive system, kinesthetic system. Okay. Then another goal is to develop and improve activities based on movement skills. All fundamental movement skills. So you need to have good knowledge of the development of these skills and to be able to reach these goals. So the goal is to develop and improve activities based on all fundamental movement skills. That is your focus for a fundamental movement program. Then another goal is to develop and improve the abilities which are prerequisites for effective movement. So you need to effectively develop balance, coordination, agility, flexibility, strength, and endurance, because all of these aspects are very important to move effectively. Without strength, without endurance, the child will not like to run, the child will not like to do specific movements. If the child is uncoordinated, he or she will be clumsy, fall over things, won't be able to catch a ball, and that is why it's important to develop all of these aspects that will improve effective movement. So the development of muscle strength and endurance must actually be addressed by means of movement. So through play, you are developing these very important prerequisites for effective movement. Then another goal is to improve the child's self-image. Then you also need to develop the child's cognitive skills and the strengthening of the three modes of learning, which is cognitive, affective, and emotional. We will get into that more at a later stage in this module. After understanding the goals that you need to focus on for a fundamental movement program, is also to understand the principles that must be kept in mind when you are drafting your movement program. So first of all, the evaluation of the motor development level of the child is very important, so that you can know at which part you need to start and what the content of the program will consist of. So you can, for example, use evaluation scales for preschool children. Remember, we focus on looking at the initial elementary and mature stage. Then also the program must be of such a nature that it affords exposure to all the possible movement skills a child ought to have. So you can't just focus on some of the skills. The program must be compiled in such a manner that the movement experience are for a specific age group, and then as a child gets older and reaches a specific level of development, that movement level should be adapted to make it more difficult. Then the skills must build upon one another. So that is to say that in a program, the basic skills must be presented and mastered before you move to more complex skills. Okay, so you, for example, will first focus on skills like walking in the locomotor skill part. Then you will move to running, and as soon as they have mastered running, you will move to skipping. It is also important that there should be variation with the possibility of repetition for the improved development of movement. Then the program must allow for pleasure and enjoyment. And they also need to feel that the achievement of success. Part of drafting your program should focus on being able to occupy the child for the entire lesson. And you need to limit waiting periods. So if you have a big group, make sure that you have enough stations for them to move from one to another and not stand in long queues waiting to participate. It is also important to keep the sessions short because the attention span of a preschool and young child is short. Very important for you is to provide encouragement. You need to praise them if they deserve the praise, if they are executing the skill in the correct manner, and let children feel good about themselves and increase the measure of their enjoyment. Then we also need to focus on the ethical point of view. It is important to remember that all children are equal. That includes gender, race, whether you are rich or poor, whether you have different religions, doesn't matter about socioeconomic and cultural background, and that they should be handled with respect and dignity. All children participating in your program should be handled with respect and dignity. And that is the principle that you need to follow always. You need to be positive. The way you address the program, the way you approach the learners, your attitude towards them will make their attitude develop and be positive for the duration of the lesson. So you are responsible for their safety at all times, and you should actually deserve their confidence in you. When children are used in research processes, they have the right to confidentiality of the information that was obtained from them. Their parents or legal guardians have to be informed regarding the research process. You cannot just do research on children or even if you're just doing play activities or movement activities. Younger children should give verbal assent if they cannot write or provide their signature. And then remember, a child also has the right to withdraw from the research project at any stage. The last part of focusing on the goals and principles and characteristics of a fundamental movement program is to look at what the characteristics of the movement specialist should be. You as a person. So you need to know each child by name. You need to call him on his name, not hey you, hey come here, the one with the red t-shirt, because immediately the child won't feel safe and won't feel that you actually understand his skills or abilities. You also need to have a love for children and a genuine interest in the development of their full potential. Remember, every successful athlete at the age of 20, 21 have reached their full potential due to the development and the programs that has been provided to them effectively during childhood and their motor development phases. It's important for you to be enthusiastic. When you as a teacher or the coach feel that you are enjoying the lesson, then the eagerness of the child will also be to enjoy the lesson. Always lead from a positive frame of mind. You need to have sufficient knowledge and understanding of the growth and development of children, the knowledge of the utility value of apparatus. You cannot just use anything, as well as how to adapt the apparatus should be effective for the child's size and the level of the development of the child. So what you need to do is you need to know equipment and you need to understand how to use equipment. Another aspect that the movement specialist needs is to be able to observe and analyze and also to make recommendations. So give the children choices and encourage experimenting and creativity. If you develop a movement development program, it's not just about focusing strictly on what you do, but also encourage the child to experiment and be creative. Children will always learn the best by doing. So gaining experience with content matters. So you need to try to keep instructions and talking to the minimum to make more time available for activity. If you are providing long demonstrations and talking a lot, they will lose you. They will not be interested in the program. They learn by doing, and they do more by being provided with more activities. You also need to remember one of the best characteristics of a movement specialist that develops movement development programs is to be organized. You always need to come prepared. You always need to plan ahead on paper. Always work out a term program or a weekly program or monthly program. And you need to set standard goals or aims. Be prepared for the lesson, make sure all the equipment is available. And yeah, also let it be a journey into self-discovery, but also the learning of specific skills. The lesson must be ready when the children arrive. All the apparatus should be laid out in their positions and ready for use before the lesson. Don't let them still have to help you to pack out equipment, except if that is part of your movement lesson plan. And then lastly, to keep group sizes small. A small group will be between 2 to 6 children in a group, depending on what the activity is that you will do. Remember, not long queues. And it is important to group children with similar development levels together so that they can challenge each other, and so that if there is one child that do not perform within the level that the rest of the group is, that child will feel that he or she cannot not accomplish anything, and that is something that you want to prevent. The last part of this chapter is to be able to actually know what the content entails of my fundamental movement program. So when you develop a movement program, there should be the component of body awareness, balance, locomotor skills, spatial orientation, manipulation skills, rhythm, and timing. That is what should be involved in your movement program. So when we look at body awareness, remember body awareness will be activities where children learn about the knowledge of their body parts. They also show control over the various parts of their body. Then they can also coordinate both sides of the body as well as the top and bottom parts, and relax some parts of the body as well as the whole body. So you need to go and think of activities that you can do to develop body awareness. One gesture that I can make is that there's very nice activities on Pinterest and on the internet to develop a child's body awareness. But basic activities and games can be where you put a big doll with all the body parts, and they need to, for example, take stickers and run from the one end to the body part, and you say, okay, put the sticker on the body's hand. Then they put it on the hand. Or you can play, for example, something simple like Simon Says. Put your hands on your head, touch your knees, touch your back. Okay, that's basic games, but there is a lot of nice examples on the internet. And one of the assignments that you are going to do is to actually develop a movement program. So I want you to think out of the box and be creative. Then another one is balance. So balance in a program will usually consist of static balance. Static balance is any activity where you ask the child to stand on one leg or stand with 2 feet in front of each other, stand on a balance beam, but static means standing still. Dynamic is where they move while balancing, for example, walking on a balance beam, and then also balancing on objects, over objects, under objects, and so forth. To be creative with balance activity is also to combine it with something else. So for example, if you say, here's a bucket full of balls, I want you to pick one up, walk over the balance beam, and throw it in the bucket on the other side. So think of nice and creative ways how you can do activities of balance during the fundamental movement phase of a child. Then we also have locomotor skills. So these skills require the use of time, space, and energy. That is anything like running, rolling, crawling, walking, jumping, skipping, galloping, hopping, animal walks, and so forth. So anything where they need to transfer beanbags or balls or whatever from one side to another side while walking like a crab, while walking like a lion, while jumping like a rabbit, is examples that you can use, but think out of the box. Also spatial orientation. So spatial orientation includes activities such as laterality, that is the internal awareness of direction, and then directionality is your outer space. Also being able to know your personal space, and more effective or more intense activities will be motor plan. So that is where you combine these activities. Time and space are involved, and you are learning a series of movements, like for example dancing. So you are doing a grapevine to the right and then to the left, and then you need to jump up and then you need to touch the floor. That is motor planning. Spatial orientation, also being able to know I'm standing behind you, I'm in front of you, I'm going under the chair, over the box, and so forth. So what is a good and nice idea is to actually build a nice obstacle course where they need to move around in different directions. Then we also have manipulation skills. Remember, that is anything like catching, throwing, rolling, kicking, bouncing, and hitting. So any nice fun activities that you can think of to practice throwing, catching, kicking, rolling, bouncing, and so forth. Lastly, we have rhythm and timing. So obviously that is also your inner rhythm, your external rhythm, and being able to do a flow of movements like dancing. Anything where rhythm is involved, clapping after me, moving to the rhythm of the music, making a dance move, repeating my move, and so forth are examples of rhythm and timing. After you have developed your movement program and you have actually presented the program, it is important to evaluate the effectiveness of your program that you have provided. So questions that you can ask yourself to evaluate the efficiency of your movement program is to know if change has taken place. So was there improvement? Was the effect achieved constant enough? So does change have any educational value? Did they learn something? How certain is it that the change was due to intervention? Was it the activity, or was it just maturation, or they are old enough to do this? Then are results dependable and sufficient to make deductions from?
Study Unit 3, Adapting a Fundamental Skill to a More Sport-Specific Skill. Children in grades 1 to 3, in other words 7 to 10 years, are in the general movement phase. This phase is characterized by the expansion and the refining of fundamental movement skills. Children become more interested in sport and the standards of performance. For this reason, it's important for us to refine and shape our fundamental skill into specific kind of sports that you can apply. For the example of today's class, we will be using rugby, and then you will do a self-assessment in the sport of netball. So first of all, when you look at the following table, with rugby as background or example, we think about our fundamental skills, which included balance, manipulation, and locomotor skill. For the purpose of this table, we focus on manipulation skills. In the first column, I've indicated to you the basic fundamental skill, which includes throwing, kicking, and catching. However, we have to now use these skills and make it applicable or more sport-specific into the following column. So where a simple throwing skill includes a fundamental skill. We have now changed the throwing skill to a pass in rugby, or throwing into throwing a ball at a line out. Similarly, we can take kicking, which is kicking simply a ball. We can make it more sport specific in changing a simple kick to a drop kick, a goal kick, a grubber kick, and even a ground kick. While we are used to catching at this age, we can also make this more sport specific in, for example, catching a ball above the hips, below the hips, and even catching it at hip height. Similarly, using rugby as background, we can also take our locomotor skills and make these simple fundamental skills, such as running, sliding, and jumping, more sport specific, in as to when we are running, we are also carrying the ball, or we are running but we are following the carrier of the ball. Sliding might now become tackling, and jumping might include now defense and throwing at a line out. Stability skills, or our balance skills, where we might be able to turn, or static and dynamic balance. So turning might turn to defense and attacking, or static and dynamic balance might be rolling and shoving. Do these examples make sense to you? Let's apply them now in a netball orientated situation. Please look at the following table, where we have our manipulation skills once again. So for a fundamental skill in netball, we used throwing and catching. Can you apply these now in a more sport-specific or specialized content? I want you to think about for a moment about the throwing skill. What are possible sport-specific, in other words, netball-specific throws that you do? Can you think of any? Let me help for a moment. What about a chest pass, or a bounce pass, shooting a goal, or restarting the game? Could you think of any of those? Next, we have our catching. Can you apply these to your sport-specific or specialized skill? So catching in netball won't be simple catching as you would do in a fundamental movement program, but you might need to be able to catch a ball from a chest pass, or a high ball, or a bounce ball. That would be the way in that you would convert the fundamental skill of catching into a more sport-specific or specialized skill. I hope these make sense to you now. Please bring any questions to class.
As I've mentioned, perceptual motor abilities will be combined for younger children by movement specialists and teachers with the motor fitness or performance related fitness classification. The perceptual motor process is a process of having increased skill and improved functioning. So proper functioning of your perceptual processes is actually a prerequisite to school success, perceptual and cognitive abilities, and is also important aspects of children's readiness for more formal learning. So your perceptual motor process, if you have increased skill and improved functioning, you will be able, or the child will have school success. They will be better ready for formal learning and have increased perceptual and cognitive abilities. And then very important, because perception is dependent on learning, so a child's perception is dependent on learning, the teaching process can have a direct impact on the child's perceptual ability. So how teaching takes place will have an impact on the child's perceptual ability.
Looking even further into perceptual motor, we need to understand the conventional definition. So the conventional definition of a perceptual motor response incorporates three processes. The first process is discrimination and input. The second one is integration with the previous or past experiences. And the first one is reacting with a purposeful movement that can be observed as a motor response. So I'm going to say this again. Your perceptual motor response consists of three processes. The first one is the input, what you receive from the environment, then the integration of that input with previous experiences that you have completed before, and then eventually you are providing a purposeful movement. And how do we know that? Because you are observed and making a specific motor response through an effective movement.
Let's look more at the practical aspect of how these input and integration and motor response will work. So we know the first process of your perceptual motor abilities is your input and discrimination. Basically, that it happens through a neurological pattern that is sent to your brain, and then it is integrated. So let's take a forehand hit during tennis. When a child observes a forehand hit during tennis by making use of their eyes, so they see the movement, then that neurological pattern goes, or that input, that sense that you've seen the action, goes to the brain, and that is a neurological pattern that occurs in the brain. Then the second part will be the integration. So let's say, for example, the child has hit a ball before, but not a specific forehand hit in tennis. The child already has previous information that is stored in the brain by being able to hit a ball. So the new observation of seeing a forehand hit in tennis is now integrated to the previous experience of being able to hit a ball previously. And then if that is integrated, new information becomes available, and that information in the brain becomes meaningful. That occurs or helps the child then to actually do the action of a forehand tennis hit, which becomes your motor response, and we know that is the third step in the process of motor abilities.
If a motor response is meaningful, that means the effective execution of the movement that a child should have or observed at the beginning has been implemented. If the child is not able to attach proper meaning to the information that is received, perception will be inadequate or inaccurate. The motor response that will follow will most probably be then faulty. Okay, so that means the child would not have successfully do a forehand hit in tennis, and that means that the wrong information has reached the muscle groups that needs to protrude or make this movement happen. Then it is also important to understand that the perceptual motor activities that a child develops helps to make the abilities of a child more accurate and sharp. But what you need to know is that these activities or abilities needs to develop. It doesn't develop by chance. It needs to develop by practicing. And the more the child practices, the better the movement or the motor response will be, and improvement will take place. So let's take the example of maths. The more you practice maths, the better you will get at it. How do we get this information from the environment to, if we say we get an input, how do we get it? We use our sensory systems, which is through our eyes, sight, then our ears for sound, feeling, touch, our tactile, Kinesthetic is our muscle awareness, which is another sensory system. Then we have our smell and we have our taste. So in education, we emphasize the visual, auditory, kinesthetic and tactile systems as the most practical approaches for instruction. So if a child needs to learn, the teacher or the coach usually use sight, touch, sound and muscle awareness for them to learn specific movements. So in the motor learning process, several input channels of sensation and perception are integrated with each other and correlated with motor activity, which in turn provides feedback information to correct the perceptions. So in performing a motor activity, like let's say for example a somersault, the child feels the surface of the floor, has the body awareness of the space, also are aware of changing the body position and the balance. The child sees the floor and other objects in relation to changing positions, and all these input and information comes from the sensory systems. And that again then forms that three processes where I've indicated input, then integration, and then a meaningful motor response. So remember, we have already done the classification of physical or health-related performance, fitness, and then we've also focused on the classification of motor performance or performance-related fitness, and now we are talking about the classification of perceptual motor abilities. Also remember, we focused on, when we looked at the physical and health related, we looked at muscle strength, muscle endurance, your cardiovascular endurance, your body composition and your flexibility. And with motor performance or motor fitness, we looked at balance, coordination, agility, speed and power. Now with perceptual motor abilities classification, we are specifically looking at the sensory areas and then also the different components that is involved in these sensory areas. This is a figure of the classification of perceptual motor abilities that you need to study and know how to draw, and also know and explain each one of these aspects in this figure. So the first one, when we look at the picture, we saw sensory areas. The first one was proprioception, and proprioception consists of spatial awareness and time or temporal awareness. So when we look at spatial awareness, that refers to the development of the awareness of the body, in which consists of two symmetrical sides. So a child will identify it later as the left and the right side of his body. The spatial awareness is also the awareness of their body in space. For example, I'm standing behind the desk, I am lying under the chair, I'm standing far from the teacher, or I am close to the beacon, and so forth. That is everything that we can consider under spatial awareness. And a child needs to have a good feeling of direction and of his body in space to be able to have good spatial awareness. The second part in the sensory areas at the proprioception is our time or temporal awareness. So temporal awareness consists of the development of a time structure within the body. And hand-eye and foot-eye coordination refers to the child's capability to coordinate this movement, which is the end result of a well-developed time structure. So your temporal awareness consists of synchronizing, rhythm, and sequence. So if we talk about synchronizing, that refers to the ability to make various parts of the body work together in harmony. So for example, if I lift up my right arm and I can also lift up my right leg together simultaneously, and it will move synchronized with each other. Another one is rhythm. So that is the process whereby I can do several synchronized actions executed in harmony. So that is where you actually do those synchronized body movements in a rhythmic pattern, and you are combining these movements. So let's say, for example, I move with my right arm and my right leg to the right, and then my left leg and my left arm follows in a rhythmic movement. Then sequence refers to the precise order that is followed to be able to complete a skill. So let's say, for example, the child needs to throw a ball overhand against a red token that is against the wall. The child needs to be able to move his body in a synchronized manner. It needs to be fluent and executed in harmony, in a rhythmic way, and follow a specific sequence to hit the target on the wall. So I can't step with my leg forward and then do a follow-through movement with my arm without releasing the ball. Then the sequence is right. If I step with my foot to the front, then I need to move with my arm forwards in an overhand manner, and then release the ball, and then follow through with my arm. The next part of the classification of perceptual motor abilities is the visual sensory area. We focus on perception, form perception, and figure background discrimination. Depth perception is the ability to judge the relative distance in three-dimensional spaces. So that is being able to know how far I need to throw, or how hard I need to throw the ball to hit the target on the wall. Form perception is the ability to correctly identify shapes and symbols. So young children are usually able to identify shapes, but as a result of inadequate visual memory, when they are still young, they cannot reproduce it correctly. So let's say, for example, I put forms in front of them, they will be able to identify them, but if they need to draw them, they might not draw them correctly because of visual memory. If I tell them, for example, to draw a triangle, but they don't see the picture in front of them, then they won't be able to draw it correctly. And then visual figure ground discrimination is the ability to select certain stimuli out of a mass. So this ability enables the child to focus on important objects, to effectively move in the visual field, to identify objects within a visual field, and it also plays a role in the improvement of different perceptual constructs that can be described functionally as visual discrimination, visual memory, spatial relationships, form consistency, figure ground discrimination, and visual closure sequential memory. So if I can make use of a basic example is, let's say, for example, we use, again, the child is required to throw a red target against a wall. But let's say there are various pictures on the wall that moves. Then visual figure background discrimination is the ability of the child to not focus on the pictures that moves on the wall, but only focusing on the red dot
to hit the target. Next, we look at the auditory sensory areas of the classification of perceptual motor abilities, and we're focusing on listen and the ability to discriminate auditory. So auditory perception is, especially in young children, they cannot read. So children rely during formal learning on listening skills and also discriminating between sounds and the interpretation of the different sounds. So auditory perception is actually improved by children listening to verbal instructions, as well as to transfer music into movement, like clapping on a rhythm or moving their arms up in the air on a rhythm of the music, and by interpreting sound in movement. Listening to specific sounds, and then you need to say what the sound is, or that sound, let's say for example it's a tree that is moving because of the wind. The child needs to be able to listen with their ears and interpret the sound by telling you that it is a tree that is moving due to the wind. Also, another thing about auditory discrimination is being able to, let's say for example, somebody is talking to you, but there are background noises. There's a crowd screaming while you are playing a netball game, but you need to listen at what your teammate is yelling to you. Then you are able to focus on your teammate talking to you rather than the crowd that is going wild or crazy. Okay, then the next one is your tactile. So we focus on being able to discriminate, tactile discrimination, and tactile memory. So tactile discrimination is the perception of touch is developed and vocabulary is developed. So for example, what is hard, what is soft, what is rough, what is smooth. So this is where you provide a child with different textures, and they learn what is a smooth surface or a rough surface, or what is hard and what is soft. Then we also get our tactile memory. So that is the ability to identify and name familiar and unfamiliar objects without using sight. So if I put 3 different objects, let's say a ball, car keys, and a pencil in front of you, but I close it and I just put your hands under the cloth, and you need to feel the pencil, and you need to feel the keys, and you need to feel the ball, then you will be able to tell me what the object is due to tactile memory. Next, we look at the auditory sensory areas of the classification of perceptual motor abilities, and we're focusing on listen. I'm now going to make use of maths as an example to explain the relationship between perceptual motor processes. Remember, the perceptual motor processes is the input, discrimination, integration, and the motor response, as well as the classifications of perceptual motor abilities, which is the sensory areas and all the explanations that I've provided. So I'm going to explain to you the relationship between these perceptual motor processes and the problems that is experienced with maths. So math skills require the ability of a child to solve problems and to make visual spatial interpretations that consequently involve spatial and numeric perceptions. So traditionally, we have techniques
in math that include both verbal and written symbols. And these symbols communicate such concepts as quantity, size, order, relationships, space, form, distance, and time. Now, if there is problems with spatial relationships in the child, it may result in confusion concerning concepts that are basic to quantitative thinking. So, for example, a child who do not understand the concepts of first or last, or beginning and end, which is part of spatial awareness, will not be ready for formal counting, because that is from the beginning to the end, or from first to last. Usually these and other spatial relationships are mastered in the preschool years, so they learn from top to bottom. They learn stuff like up and down, they learn over and under, they learn beginning and end, near and far, first and last, front and back, and across. And they can learn all of these activities through movement. Move over the chair, reach the top of the tree, and so forth. So the problems so one of the problems with maths is if the spatial awareness is not properly developed in perceptual motor abilities. Then also problems in visual perception and visual motor association might also complicate the math ability. These students with visual perception and motor association problems have trouble with setting, identification, recognition and reproduction of shapes, and recognition and reproduction of number symbols. Then if a child has, for example, directionality problems, that will also interrelate with spatial relationships, which will make maths difficult. Children that will experience this kind of problem may also encounter quantitative thinking difficulties. So they will struggle with using a number line. They will struggle understanding positive and negative numbers, solving equations, and computing problems involving 2 or more columns or digits. So for this reason, if there is, for example, the motor problems of spatial awareness and visual form perception and visual discrimination, that is something that you as a movement specialist can develop through movement and motor development programs, and that will then help the child to be able to improve their maths ability. Here is some of the signs that may indicate perceptual motor deficiencies that is observed by teachers. So one is the lack of coordination in motor skills. So all motor activities are not fluent and effective. They might be clumsy in daily activities, falling over things, doing activities messy, and so forth. They might experience it difficult to coloring in large symbols. Okay, so spatial awareness and directionality problems might occur, top and bottom, and so forth. They might experience difficulty in matching symbols and shapes, visual discrimination, and so forth. They have constant inattentiveness and a short attention span. They will always look around. They might focus for a second on the work and then just start looking around due to their short attention span. They might have the inability to recognize and interpret symbols correctly. So if I give them symbols or shapes, they will identify them wrongfully. They have the inability to interpret pictures correctly, difficult with letter and number sequences, like letters following each other, or numbers following on each other. They will have the inability to reproduce letters, numbers, and symbols correctly. So if I say, for example, write the letter A, then they might write a different letter, or it might be that they, if I say B, they would rather write a D or a P. They will have difficulty in form and depth perception. They will have short retention duration. So I will tell them something now or show them an activity with sequence or something that they need to remember, but they won't remember it they might be able to do the activity immediately. If I then later ask them to do the activity again, they cannot remember how to do it. They might also have difficulty in interpreting lateral directions, lack of consistent dominance, so that means that now they write with their right hand, and then later they might write with their left hand. These children usually also, due to their lack of abilities, show poor self-concept, and they don't really want to participate in games and show a poor performance in movements. They can definitely show the inability during dance activities with regard to rhythm and spatial awareness, as well as body awareness, and they can show the inability to name their body parts. This is the rest of the list that I've just mentioned in the previous slide. Now that we know the aspects that the child might struggle with if they have perceptual motor deficiencies, there are a few teaching suggestions or tips that can be followed to help these children. First of all, it is important to encourage the child to verbalize the color. So if they take out a specific pencil that is a specific color, they need to say what the color is. Then the same with the shape or the size of the object he uses. Then another one is to repeat the task several times. So that means we are practicing the task to help the child to learn the concept. Then only vary the pattern to size, shape or color as soon as you have completed or repeated the task several times. And then do not combine the various attributes such as color or numbers until each concept is well learned. So you're first going to make sure that they know all the colors and they can recall the colors, and if you show them the colors, they know what the color is. And then you can, for example, add numbers. So you can provide orange circles, and then you can provide number 6, and they need to count 6 orange colors or circles. Okay, so that is how learning can be made easier for them. Don't go to a next step or make it too much effort or add too many things if they haven't managed to learn one aspect and understand that aspect and remember that aspect. Good morning, students. We are discussing study unit 2.3, the use of apparatus. You will see that we have skipped some of the other study units. We are still going to present that during PowerPoint recordings, but the focus will be on the use of apparatus because it actually links with the previous study unit of 1.2 where we focused on the
phases of motor development. You will see that in your textbook, the use of apparatus falls under chapter 2. In my book, it's page 72, so it will be more or less the same in your book. First part of the use of apparatus is to provide you with an introduction of why we are focusing on this. So first of all, apparatus should not be the reason for poor execution of a skill. What this means is it is very important to determine how big an apparatus adjustment should be. So if we take an example of a child that needs to learn how to throw a ball, if they're still young and they use a large ball, the standard size ball, it might have an effect on learning what the technique is that they need to use to perform the throwing skill correctly. And that is why it is important for us to understand how to actually adapt a ball or any other apparatus to learn a child a specific skill for their age. So let's take the throw pattern again. So first of all, we will have to look at the size of the ball. If a ball is too heavy for a child, it will directly influence the technique of learning how to throw the ball. Because if it's too heavy, they will either position their body to be able to hold the ball, and they might position their body in the wrong way that will affect the technique of the throwing skill. If they then learn the throwing skill in the incorrect way by not using the correct technique, they will continue to practice it in the wrong way, and that will eventually influence them later in life when they want to perform in sport activities where it is required for a child to throw a ball. Okay, then also as part of the throw pattern, we also need to focus on the strength of the throw and the physical ability of the child. So the strength of the child and the physical ability of the child will also have an influence on what the apparatus size or weight is that we will use. What we are basically saying is as long as the weight and the size of the ball are specific and within the physical ability of the thrower, then the technique will be performed in the correct way. Otherwise, there will be problems. So what we need to know is, as a movement specialist, it is important to be able to adapt apparatus. So the use of apparatus such as balls and hitting instruments is required for the development of specific skills in young children. And we as the movement specialists require the knowledge of the advantages and disadvantages of using standard apparatus when developing specific skills in a young child. The example that I am using is if it is required of a young child to throw a standard size basketball and he or she needs to throw the ball against a specific target. Okay, as you can see the little boy with the picture. That will be, okay, so let's say that is the young child has the standard basketball and need to throw it to the target. If you take an older child and they have also the standard size basketball and hit the target, you will soon see that it will be an unfair demand for the young child to actually hit the target. This can also be the other way around, where an older child is provided with a too light or small size ball and no further skill development takes place because the activity is too easy for him or her. So what we say here is it is a disadvantage for the young child and actually the older child, depending on what the apparatus is that they need to use.
we are actually putting an unfair demand on the young child, and they will not be able to learn the correct technique. Children or young children in this instance are at a disadvantage when they play using the standard size of the apparatus, and this will actually have an influence on participation in sport and play activities. Another thing is they will have poor technique and they will learn bad habits, and it's very difficult for them to undo what they have learned, and if they've learned the wrong technique, to actually learn the new one is not as easy as it seems. In order for you as the movement specialist to successfully design and make correct adaptations of apparatus will require specific mechanical knowledge and expertise. This implies, for example, having the knowledge about the amount of power that is required to throw an object effectively, and also concerning the size, speed, and the distance, for the sake of the correctness of the learning steps. So you as a movement specialist needs to have knowledge about all of these factors when you are using apparatus, for example, for the throwing skill. Lastly, it is also important that the apparatus should offer positive feedback regarding the goal or the aim to be reached with the apparatus. So if the apparatus is not effective, then positive feedback will not happen. In your textbook on page 73 to page 75, there is research findings on the adaptations of apparatus, and it will be good for you to go and read through that for practical examples to understand the adaptation of specific apparatus while developing skills in children. Here on this slide is some examples of apparatus in sport that needs to be adapted to the physical build and the size of the child. If we, for example, look at a goal post, we will see that if you think about it, a child that is still very young and very short, if the goal post is too tall and they need to learn how to shoot a ball into the hoop, it will affect the technique and the quality of learning the skill to throw the ball into the hoop. Whereas if the goalpost is shortened, the child can learn the correct technique, and later as they get older, the goalpost can be longer in length. The same with soccer. In soccer, it will be the other way around. The goalpost will first need to be wider for the child to learn the correct kicking and aiming skill to reach the ball or to get the ball into the goalpost. Whereas as the child will get older, the goalpost can be adapted to its original size. I have already talked a little bit about the ball and the size of the ball, but one thing that I can maybe just also mention is if you take your hand and you put a basketball-sized ball in your hand, you will be able to control the ball and manage to catch the ball and throw the ball. If you think of an 8 or 9-year-old, or even younger, 5, 6, 7-year-old child, their hands are very small. That is why there are different sizes of the, let's say for example, the netball ball that they will start with, and later only will they play with the size ball that is usually used in netball matches, later in their primary school career. Also, if a child do not have the same strength as an adult, and therefore the weight of a ball, for example, will have to be adjusted for a child to be able to do the technique of throwing and catching correctly. Then if you do target throwing, it will also be good to adapt your apparatus with regard to distance, and also if they need to throw, a younger child need to throw a target, it will be a good idea to make the target bigger. As they progress and improve, then you will make the target smaller. In summary, if we talk again about the adaptation of apparatus for young children, the most important factor that motivates for smaller and lighter apparatus is that the anthropometric composition of a young child, in comparison with that of an adult, does not justify the same size sporting equipment. If you look at the example of visual information, if the background for a young child is too busy, then they will struggle to discriminate between the background and what they actually need to conduct or execute, and that will influence how they will execute a specific movement. There is also a way, if we talk about apparatus in the sport environment, to modify specific aspects when working with young children during the development of skills. So we already know that we need to be able to adapt equipment for younger children. This also might include dimensions of the equipment or the surface that the children are practicing on or playing on. The task can be modified in specific sports to make it easier for them to develop the skills necessary for the sport, and then later the task can be adapted again to fall within the rules and regulations of that specific sport. So it's not only just adapting the apparatus or the equipment, but also thinking of the rules of the game, dimensions and task. If I can make an example of the rules, you might not immediately start playing tackle rugby if you first want them to learn the basic passing skills and development during rugby. Then you might have scenarios during play where they will only touch each other and not tackle each other. That is one way to adapt a rule. Before I continue with the apparatus for movement development programs, in the previous slide I spoke about the sport changes that can also help with children developing effectively during a skill development. So here's just a few examples, is to lower the hoop in basketball that I've already mentioned, or to lower the net in volleyball, and to maybe lower the crossbar in soccer, make the task more easier for the posture of the child to execute the movement effectively. Then also another example is decreasing the level of the inflation in a soccer ball or a volleyball. The young athlete or child can then manipulate them with more control and possibly less fear. Also, changing the dimensions of the serving line in tennis or volleyball or badminton will ensure the tasks are developmentally appropriate. The rules is changes such as no press in basketball, no fumble recovery in football, or no offside in soccer or hockey. So you're actually reducing the demands of the players so that they can focus on effectively executing the skills. You as a movement specialist or coach should also strive to match opponents in according to the skill and the size of the children.
So it will not help if you add a young child that is short to an opponent that is a lot taller and maybe bigger. That will also affect how the child will learn the skill. So ideally, the scaling or modification principle should be applied across all sports for young children so that the component skill first can be learned properly. And we also talk during the previous class that focused on the phases of motor development. We also talked about the development of movement development programs, which include your spatial orientation, your body awareness, coordination, your balance, your rhythm, and so forth. So when you as a movement specialist are developing a movement development program, you are obviously going to use apparatus or equipment for the learners or the young children to learn these specific movements. So you as a movement specialist must be able to adapt or construct kind of equipment that will help a child to adapt to his environment and also to learn the specific movement skills. And you need to be able to adjust to the differences in the body dimensions of a child and the growth of a child. This also includes thinking of what the apparatus is that I will buy or consider for my movement development program. And for that, you need to follow specific guidelines to ensure optimum use during a movement development program. So the first guideline that you will always have to follow is you need to be able to adapt the size of the child, or you need to be able to adapt the apparatus according to the size of the child, and you need to be able to accommodate their growth. Examples of this type of adaptation is, let's say for example you are using different steps during the movement development program. You will first start with a low step and gradually let it become higher as the child is growing or improving in that specific skill. Then one that we've mentioned already is the size. Let's say for example you are using a ball that you should be able to adapt to various sizes and also to different weights depending on the ability and the size of the child. So even though a ball stays a ball, you need to be able to adapt the size and the weight. Then when we look at heating apparatus, first of all, if you think of the size difference or the how broad the difference is between a cricket bat and a baseball bat, you will already find that these two types of heating apparatus will be different for a child that use it to hit a ball. But now you can further take the cricket bat and you can further refine it, make it maybe thinner or broader. You can focus on the thickness, what the handle length is. For a young child, if the handle length is too long, they will not be able to handle the handle.
Then also the surface of where the child is hitting on the bat, that can be adapted and made bigger. And then also to consider the weight. So if you take any hitting apparatus, a tennis racket, you can also adapt especially the weight and the length of the handle so that a younger child can learn the correct technique of doing a forehand hit or a backhand hit. Then when we talk about handles or hitting surfaces, that should also be adapted. It either needs to be smaller or bigger. Then we can also talk about hoops. If you need to throw a ball in a hoop, it will have to be adapted according to different circumferences, depending on the age of the child. It might be a bigger hoop size for a younger child than an older child. Then also maybe an adjustable crossbar where you can actually change the height of the crossbar on which the child is hanging. So it will not be that high for a younger child, and it might become higher as the child is progressing. Then if you do anything with slide apparatus, the steepness of which the sliding apparatus is used will be adjusted. It will not be that steep for a younger child. If we use, for example, balance beams, you first kind of start with a broader surface and not that high off the ground for a child to walk over the balance beam, and then gradually it will be made, the surface or the surface will be made smaller, and the height of the beam will become lower as the child progresses. I've already just discussed this slide. Apologies, I didn't move on, but here you can read again what I have just explained of adapting size and adapting equipment according to the size and increase of a child's growth. Another guideline to follow is the apparatus that can supply information to the child about his motor performance should be very effective. So what I'm actually saying here is a child requires confirmation that he or she is performing the skill that he is learning in the correct way. A young child needs inputs where they feel accomplished and something that indicates to them, I have completed it in the correct way. So one example is bells that ring when the target is hit. So let's say, for example, the skill that is required is the child needs to do a proper throw technique and throw the ball against a target that is attached to a wall. If the child throws the ball and it hits a target, then a bell goes off that tells him he did it correctly because he hit the target. So if the bell does not go off, then obviously he knows his performance was not correct and he needs to try again. That is one easy way that you can develop your movement skill exercise in a way that a child understands when he is performing it in the correct way. Another way to include effective performance to show a child that he is doing it correctly is, for example, to use colors. Okay, so colors can be where you have a red card and a green card, and if the child is performing the motor skill correctly, you hold up the green card. If the child is doing it incorrectly or didn't hit the target or didn't manage to complete the task correctly, the red card will go up. If it's the orange card, it is indicating that you are almost there, but you need to focus on this, and this. You can also maybe include letters A, B, and C, and then an hourglass. An hourglass can be if they need to do an activity within a certain time. So you use the hourglass for them to see that if the hourglass is still running and the movement was executed effectively, then the child knows he completed the task in the correct way within the time limit that was provided to him. Then moving apparatus can also be used to give feedback to the child about his performance. So there are various ways that you can use motor performance indications to a child in whether they have developed it effectively or whether they need to try again. Remember, children always want a visual or a loud indication of success, and this is one way that you can manage that. And the third guideline to follow for adapting apparatus is the focus should be that the apparatus must be designed in such a way that it encourages a child to move mechanically correct. An example of this is to use neat feet, which encourage correct foot placement during overhand throwing actions. So what the suggestion here is you take a piece of cardboard, you cut out a right foot and a left foot, you place it on the floor so that the child has a visual idea of where he needs to put his foot before and during the throw of the overhand throw. Must it be the right foot first? Must it be the left foot first? Do I need to follow through? So there are various examples that you can use depending on what the movement skill is that you are using for them to learn. Then also hand positions. For example, if a child learns how to pass and catch a netball ball, it is a good idea to place or paint hands on the netball ball for the child to learn what is the correct way to hold the netball ball with one hand and two hands so that they can master the specific netball pass that they need to be able to execute. Then also another example can be you can use stickers to put on the floor or marked on a wall where they need to throw or where they need to move so that they know, or where they need to stand so that they know what the position is that they need to take in for a specific movement skill. So that is actually a nice ways to adapt the activities for young children to help them with visual cues so that they can understand how to move correctly during a movement skill. The fourth principle to adapt is that the apparatus should be designed in such a way to keep the child's visual and perceptual shortage in mind. So for example, you can make speed adjustments if it is required, for example, to catch a ball. Okay, so one way to do it is if a young child is struggling to catch a ball, it will be easier to use an apparatus that moves slowly toward the child so that the child has more time to focus on the apparatus and then do the catching skill effectively. Here the example is to use a balloon. You can also deflate a ball, especially a hard ball, that will move slower through the air so that the child can catch the ball. This gives the young child the opportunity to catch it. Then also, if we look at, when we specifically look at ballistic activities, like a throwing skill, the strength that the child uses must be enough. So the distance that the child should throw to the target must also be big enough. If the focus is on the throwing skill, you need to make sure that the distance is accurate enough for the child to be able to throw effectively and hit the target. One of the most important principles to use when adapting apparatus is when you are teaching motor skills to children, it is important for the child to develop the normal body posture while they are practicing a specific motor development skill. So in preschool, children will protrude their stomach, their abdomen, and then they will also have a lumbar curve that is too big, and then the scapula will also protrude, and the shoulders are more round. The head will be slightly forward, and the feet will be turned slightly inward. So to improve the abdominal, shoulder, arm, and leg strength during the childhood or young childhood years is very important, and the way you can do that is by means of doing hanging activities, swinging and climbing activities, to actually correct this postural deviations. So as part of developing your motor development program and focusing on specific apparatus, you also need to focus on doing activities that will help them to develop a normal posture. Something that I think I haven't mentioned is swim activities is very good for posture development, and that is something that should be focused on. Before I'm talking about the examples, there's only one more principle that you also need to remember, and that is the safety of the child must always be a priority in the making. And when you are developing your apparatus, you should make sure that the apparatus is safe and won't hurt the child. So I've added these pictures just to show you different ways of adapting apparatus. If you look at the swings, we have a large swing and a smaller swing. So if you, for example, develop the vestibular system, you will first start on a large swing and then move towards a smaller swing. Also, as the young child's balance will improve, that is how you will adapt. If you look at the tree stumps that is in the middle, where the child will be required to do balancing activities, you will one thing is it is nice because it has color and nice pictures to step on and keep their balance, but you will also see that the height will start from very low and then it will start to increase in height. So that is another way to adapt a balance activity. Next to it, you will also see different sizes of the balance beams with different heights. So you will see a very low one with a broader surface, and then it will become higher with a more round and unstable surface. Then, as I've mentioned, your batting or your hitting equipment. So you will first start with a softer ball, bigger ball, and a bigger bat surface with a shorter handle length. And then later it will become smaller with a longer handle length. You can also see the ball sizes that will be different for younger children, and as they grow and develop, it will become bigger. And then the last one is where they need to climb up on a plank, where the one is smaller rock climbing pads where they need to get up, which will be difficult. So to adapt, you can make use of something like tires for them to learn to climb and do spatial orientation and coordination movement skills. This is basic examples, but there is a lot of creative ideas that you can follow and develop your own nice idea for one of the movement development activities that you want to develop in a young child.